All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 61 today. We're going to talk about Dr. Clare Graves and spiral dynamics with our buddy Ben. What's going on, Ben? How are you?
Hey, Mike out Morris, how you going, guys?
Hey,
Yeah,
how's it
pretty
going, my
good.
man?
So you reached out to me. We did that episode on the Dunning-Kruger effect with our other buddy Andrew, um, and how it plays into like philosophy and the way we think and everything. And you sent me a nice message about this gentleman, Dr. Clare Graves, who I'd never heard of, but over the last like week or so, I've been doing a lot of research and watching movies and reading stuff, and it seems to be kind of an interesting theory, and I think it's relevant. To the times that we're going through right now with the way people are acting and fighting and division and all that kind of stuff. So it gives you, it's almost like a blueprint on the evolution of the mind and how to talk to people that are on different levels. Not necessarily it's better or worse. I'm higher than you, lower than you, whatever like that. But it's more along the lines of this person's in this mindset of thinking, how can I get through to this person, or how can we relate, or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is. It's just a worldview. Most people's worldviews will be based off their life conditions. So they sort of shape the way you view the world and the way you think and act in the world. And Dr. Graves just basically mapped that process out. He mapped it out on both on a global scale, on a social scale, and on an individual scale. So he sort of the way he done it as well was quite interesting. He sort of analysed students in his psychology classes, and he taught psychology in New York in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So he gathered a lot of data off over 1,000 students, I think it was, and yeah, he basically come up with this model of how we evolve, basically, like you said, how our mind evolves, and yeah, how humans have changed because of that.
Yeah, it was. I think it was over 1,000 students over a period of I forget how many years, but he died in '86. I think he was in his late 70s at the time. But his I think it was Union University, if I'm not mistaken, that he was teaching at
Okay.
too. But he yeah, he like interviewed all of his psychology students and would, you know, map everything out from there. How do you think though, when you look at the chart, which I'll bring up in a second, but when you look at the chart, do you think that when he was looking at the data that it was obvious that there was different like like uh these tiers or levels? Like do you think that that was like glaringly obvious, or do you think it was something that he had to go through and kind of format?
Yeah, good question. It took him a long time. What he did was after he did it over 9 years. He specially designed course that he had run to gather this data, and so over 9 years he was collecting data, and each year he would sort that data out, and basically at the end of the year he would come up with he would notice little patterns coming up, but he wasn't too sure, and he would actually share his data with a peer, so another psychologist or another lecturer, and they would analyze it, and they would come up with their little groups as well, and give it back to him. And he done that every year. He gave it to a different person, so a different peer of his, and got them to sort it out. And each year, as they keep coming back, they just kept coming back with the same sort of groups. And so once he realised that everyone else, all of his peers were noticing this, he realised that he might have been onto something. So he kept going with it.
So here's the chart here. Um, so let's start at the bottom here. Number one, it's beige. So that's pretty much nobody's on the beige level, or in terms, it's like our
Like an
most
animal?
yeah, it's like our most primitive consciousness. You know,
Uh-huh.
what do you want
Sure.
to say, like reptilian brain or something along those lines?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's very instinctual, that way of living. It's in the modern world, it's basically a baby. So as a baby, you live an automatic existence where you just rely on your instincts for survival, and that's basically along the lines of crying for whatever you need,
Okay.
and relying on whatever structures you have to provide you with what you need. So generally, your parents.
Now, when you go up to number two, it says tribal. Um, Do you think we know that obviously this is when humans were coming together and it was more about the group than it was the individual. So number one is like, um, I got to look out for number one. I'm just surviving basically, like you said, baby or whatever I need to just survive.
Yeah.
Number two is more group thinking, where it cuts across and it's for the group and not the individual. So what do you think when people say tribal, they talk about it in a negative way. Like nowadays in modern times, when people say, "Oh, he's tribalistic," or it means that you're not open minded or you're not accepting of other people. But really, it was just a stage in our evolution of consciousness.
Yeah, that's right. It was a stage where we started to come to groups, like you said, and it's Graves sort of thought it would be the time around 40,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. We started thinking like that, and that was because he sort of seen a lot of culture emerging around that time. Like cave art, and we find a lot of old stone tools and things like that, and it sort of gave a lot of evidence of people living that way. So yeah, I don't think there's anything bad with it. But all these stages were all good. They were required to drive us through this process. There is tribal people on the earth still today, in some places, Papua New Guinea, and I think there's those Sentinelese people. So there's definitely still tribal people around today, and it's just because of their life conditions. They live very simply. They haven't got a lot of complexity in their lives, and they don't really need to evolve any further than what they are. And we were like that for a while, 40, 50,000 years ago. We lived like that for a long time.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. Well, there's also these barriers that they talk about, where there's this like transitional barrier where to go from number one to number two is not just it's not smooth, or number two to three, or it's this thing that happens where it's like you have to make a choice based on some sort of switch that happens within your consciousness, and then it like, maybe becomes contagious, or other people start to feel the same thing. But what was your understanding in terms of that? Because I thought that that was interesting, that it's not, and if you think about it, it's true. I mean, we've all probably been at different of these points within our life as we go through, and we'll talk about it more. But um, what do you think these barriers, like, how do you think they get broken, in your opinion?
Yeah, sure. Well, Grave mapped out just a very simple complex, a simple concept that was that change process. And I think I sent you a graph for that as well. And he said basically we go through this process in life where complexity is constantly being added. So day after day, year after year, we're adding complexity onto our life. And if we don't manage to adjust ourselves and improve ourselves to cope with the different complexities that are added to our life, we basically, you know, on that chart, it shows you fall into this layer of stress, and stress will enter your life, and you'll start to not cope with all the complexity being added. Yeah, there's the chart there, and so the aim is to stay above that green line, and by simply not, you know, keeping up with all the complexities adding to your life, you'll fall below it. So that's that feeling of stress that we have in our lives, and Graves sort of thought that the first thing that humans do is we look back all the time. We want to get back to that stable line that's behind us there. So we'll look back and go, I've got to get back to doing what I used to do. And, you guys might be familiar with this. Your president used it quite often in his speeches, was we got to make America great again. It's that rhetoric that humans
Right.
always look back to the old days and reminisce on how good it was. And we like that feeling. And so, as you know, if you look at that chart, you can't go back. You have to move forward because
Yeah.
complexity is being added to your life. So by naturally looking back, we'll fall down into that chaos. We'll try to do things the old way and it won't work for us, and eventually we'll fall down into that chaotic hole in our life. And that's, you can there's that chaos theory, which is like a supernova. The act of a supernova is the chaos theory, where something melts down, reforms, and explodes out as new elements, or whatever it is. And so that's sort of the same process we go through. We enter that chaos period, and it will break down. Well, you could say it breaks down chemical elements in our body, and changes our brain chemistries and things like that, and it enables us to think differently and maybe start to solve some of these complex problems that have arose in our lives. And I suppose over time, the the more problems you'll solve, the better you'll start feeling about yourself, and that's that moving out of that chaotic zone and into renewal. And once you hit that renewal phase, you'll go through this yourself. You'll notice it with other people. You're just really excited about everything, and you think you've solved all your problems, and you can tell everyone how to solve their problems in relation to what you had and things like that. And it's a bit of an unguided missile feeling, but you come out of there, different in a way, and eventually you'll end up on that new stability line up the top there. And Graves sort of said at that point you would be a more complex human, and you would view the world differently because of that. And that's sort of that drive process. And that change process is sort of a universal thing. It doesn't have to be this massive transformational change that I'm talking about. You can just go through minor changes in day-to-day lives through that process. But every now and then, you will go through these massive changes in your life. And I think we're all aware of that. We go from a baby to a toddler to a teenager to a young adult to a more mature adult. And, you eventually can end up an old, wise person, I suppose.
Yeah. This is some pretty complex stuff, though, in terms of, if you could just turn your volume down just a smidge, that
Watch out
on,
now.
on your end, because
Starting to growl.
yeah, I sound like a monster on my end of things. But yeah, okay. So my thing is this: is that I think you can't go backwards in terms of once you hit the new plateau. You've already been indoctrinated into that level, whether you stay there or not, obviously, but that it exists. You can obtain that feeling or those emotions and that mindset. But when it comes to like, okay, so the way I look at this is, we'll go through more of the levels here in a second, but I think I know people that I observe that will go from level to like they'll bump up and then they'll bump down a couple. Like they transition based on. So I don't think it's as simple as, oh, so I'm to the new level. This is just who I am. I think it's something where um, part of you might still be trapped in the other level, or there might be different parts of your life that aren't always aligned on that level that you just reached. Maybe it was a spiritual level, or maybe it was some sort of scientific epiphany, or whatever along those lines. It doesn't mean that the rest of your life is aligned on that level as well, because there are different parts of the life. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's correct. I think what tends to happen is, as the theory states, it's sort of on your life conditions, and depending on what you're doing in your life will shape those conditions. So some people, you could imagine, like when you go to work, there's a certain sort of life conditions that you in your workplace, and so you'll operate in a particular stage in your workplace, and then you might go home, and you have a different way of operating in your home, and you might operate with another layer in your home. You know what I mean? And then you might go to a community event or somewhere out in public, and you'll act differently again. So you can definitely operate on different layers. What Graves sort of stated was, once you've been through a layer and progressed to a next one, the old one's still in you. It's sort of superseded, but it's in there. And so you can go back to them at any stage. And a good example, I suppose, the most obvious example is, you could be sitting here like we're doing right now and having a conversation, quite happy and content, whatever layer that we're on. And like your house might catch on fire, you know what I mean? And you immediately just stop your conversation and switch into this survival mode. You'll stop thinking about all the complex things you've got going through your mind and just focus on survival. So that survival layer is always in you. And so that's what he said, and the same goes if you move to a tribal location where you have to live in a tribal way, you will adjust into that mode of living. And so you can actually go back to any stage at any time in your life. And some people, Graves said, will choose to stay in one way because they prefer it that way. And even without knowledge of this model, people will do that. They'll just say, like someone might be layer 4 and follow authoritarian rules and strictly stick to their religious beliefs, and they might be happy doing that for their entire life. So they'll just live that way. And you see people doing that, and because society is predominantly 5, they look at that society and go, "Oh, you guys are just doing it wrong. You're heathens going to hell in a handbasket, basically." And so if you choose to stay at a level and society progresses on as it is, you can kind of, you know, you naturally feel that stress and chaos in your life. And if you live long enough, you might change. But a lot of people, what I see is they sort of won't change, and they get to their old age and they're just rigidly stuck in that worldview, and it doesn't correlate with what happens, what they see outside, and what their grandchildren are thinking, and what their children are thinking, and so we can tend to have conflict because of that. And this model's really good for people that do have conflict with people because of these reasons. You know, you can sort of understand different worldviews and then realize that there's nothing wrong with each particular layer or each particular worldview. It's just the way you see the world, and other people just see it differently. That's all.
Don't you think though we're all going to become a victim of time in that way? Like at some point, we're all going to be the old, you know, fogey who, you know, doesn't isn't hip with, you know, the most modern views, you know. So even the most, let's say just the most progressive or the most radical, either way, left or right or whatever, at some point they're going to be antiquated, you know, even just as time goes on, because I think it slows down once you get older. I don't think you keep up, you know, in that way, because you get older, things start to happen, you got grandkids, you got, you know, this. So I think what it happens is obviously, and time speeds up, you know, each year
Yes.
you're alive, your perspective of time is sped up dramatically, you know. That's why you hear older people, oh my god, the year went by, or, you know, like, because it's true, it just, you know, when you're 10 years old, 1 year is 1/10. It's huge, you know, but when you're 50 years old, you know, what a year's nothing. So,
Yeah.
so in that regard, I think we're all going to become victim to this thing. So I don't, when you see people that get so aggressive either way about it, it's like, just chill out, you know. We're all going to be leveled out, and we're all going to the same place, you know. There's nothing special or crazy going on there. So but yeah, I think we're all going to be victims of that. So I just
Yeah,
accept it.
definitely, man. And that's you know, I think with understanding that there are these layers, we will be more accepting, you know, and just realize that people are thinking differently to us for the reasons that Graves states, that it is your life conditions, you know. And so as you get older, your life conditions change dramatically. You stop doing things really, you know, as you did as you were younger anyway. You stop going to work, you start staying at home more, you start doing different things than what you did. You might, you know, I don't know what old people really do. They play lawn bowls and checkers and chess. And so that creates their life conditions, you know. And so inevitably, you're right, they will stop keeping up with this evolutionary process, you know. And it's just a natural thing that happens, I suppose. So when we see, you know, like you said, if we see people struggling with it, it's good to just sort of teach them about this stuff and go, look, it's okay to think differently. You don't have to keep up. It's all right, you know. Time moves forward. You know, if you're happy the way you are, just be happy, you know, and try and add positive energy. You know, that's all you need to do. So, but,
I also think it's possible to master one of the above one, like, so two, three, four, five. I think you could be every single one of those things. Not to, I mean, yes, together, but what I'm talking about is, if you wanted to stay on tribal, if you wanted to stay tribal, like, I'm sure there's amazing people that live in these tribes, that they're kind, they take care of their own, they're selfless, they're, you know. So I think it's possible to live an exemplary life on any one of these things. But almost like when you start to add them to your tool belt, that's where you start to get to the higher levels of peeling back what we exactly are and what we could be in the future.
yeah, that's right. Um, on that graph there, you can see that layer 5 has got modern paradigm written under it, and that really is the dominant. It's a celebrity culture. It's our corporatized culture, the materialistic way of living. How we all strive, you know, for success, to earn more money and to be the best person we can, and you can see that around, especially Western societies. Anyway, you know, that isn't in every country. There is other countries still operating in the older layers, but certainly in our countries that we live in, America and Australia, the 5 is the main one. But um, yeah, we're seeing a push. I'm sure you guys are seeing this push into postmodernism, where people are becoming more community minded. As you can see on that thing, it says the right brain is a sacrifice, self communal way, and basically what that means is as we operate on those even numbers, we're more communally minded, and we're more willing to change ourselves to fit in with our environment or our communities. And on the odd side there, you'll see it says left brain, express self, and individual. So that just basically means we're more wanting to change our environments to suit our needs. That's that real manipulating type of people that we are at the moment. You know what I mean? We want to bend and shape everything into making comfort zones for ourselves. Our furnitures and our technologies and all that sort of stuff has come out of this layer 5 scientific industrial way of thinking, and basically I think what Graves was sort of worked out with this theory is it's sort of like a pendulum. So we'll go too far on one way, we'll just keep pushing onto the left direction as far as we can, and then eventually we have to start swinging back to the other side, and that's generally how it goes through our life. We'll sort of if you start down at layer 2, say, it's where we start to have some memories of, and you were a child and it was a communal way, you were looking at your family to learn how to act in the world, you're looking at all that sort of stuff, and after a while you don't want to follow the family rules anymore, right? You want to start expressing yourself in your way, and that's that swing back into that layer 3. So you want to become more of an individual when you're a teenager, and you'll break the rules and you won't care about what people tell you as much, you know what I mean? And you'll do that for a while, and until that change process happens. So you might put yourself into that chaotic zone, living as a crazy teenager, breaking all the rules, and then you'll push yourself up into layer 4, which is very, very much follow the rules again, and look back to your community. How do I do things? Generally the time when you settle down and get a job, look for it to start families and things like that. So, and then after a while, you'll become good at that, breaking the rules, and you get bored. So, but I'm going to break some rules now and try and become the most successful person I can, and we justify that. We align ourselves with groups that think, that we think can help make us more successful. So just in the natural process of doing that, you create enemies, but you don't really want to create enemies, but you will. You know what I mean? And so that's like the Americans are at war with certain other countries who they decide are their enemies. Australia is too, and other countries do the same thing. So it's okay to sort of have enemies as long as you're looking after your own group, And then the push into 6 has been, we've done a lot of that. We've done a lot of warring amongst different nations, and we've done a lot of fighting amongst ourselves in different personal groups, just whatever, different groups rivaling each other in society. And more and more people are realising the destruction that causes. So we're sort of going back to that communal way, like, right, how can I change myself to suit my environment again, and stop changing my environment to suit myself, sort of thing. And that's the layer that a lot of people are pushing into. And Graves said that when we're in those first 6 layers, we're not really aware of this stuff. We just we think that if we're at 6, we look at 5 and think, oh, you guys are just destroying everything. And if you're a 4, you're looking at 5, thinking the same thing. And so all those different layers are clashing with each other. And we sort of notice that in society today. If you notice people, a teenager clashing with someone that's telling them to follow the rules all the time, and then someone that follows the rules is clashing with the people that aren't following the rules all the time, and then the people that aren't following the rules all the time are clashing with the guys that are saying, hey, we've got to fix all this stuff for everyone else. You guys breaking the rules and stuffing it for the whole planet. And so you can see how we've driven through this process, these worldviews.
So number 3, which is red, would be like how when we were tribes and then we started to break into civilization, and you would have a dictator or somebody that would take power or take charge. And like you were saying earlier, like some people need to be told what to do, or some people need that. So that would be the egocentric part of the mind, like you were discussing. I think your correlation was like a teenager breaking all the rules. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you move to absolutistic, which would be like dark versus light, good versus evil. It's very binary, very, you know, it's religion based. Usually you probably see a lot of people that are super religious touch on this
Black and
level.
white.
Black and white. Yes. Very, very black and white. So I think I think when you see number four, though, I think when you look at like spirituality and how that plays into all this kind of stuff, I think like you were saying, you could jump back and forth. I think some people, there's certain parts to your mind that will touch back. So like if let's say I don't necessarily believe in a specific religion, but I do have a certain amount of spirituality. I mean, let's face it, we're living, breathing magic talking through a computer right now. Like what are we doing here? What's the point of all this? Whether this is just, I don't believe it's an
Say it
accident, but
again, bro.
if it was an accident, it's crazy just to even think about. So either way, I accept either of the fates. But when it comes to when it comes to talking about this kind of stuff, I think it's important to point out, like I said, I don't think any of these levels are better or worse than one another, but I do think you can prescribe them to certain stuff. So you said, so like number five is like where most people are at. Like that's where people on a day-to-day basis, whether you're American, Australian, any type of Western culture or modern society, is usually most people are living in this multiplistic, um, you know, style living or modern paradigm. Now, I will say this. So if you look at, you were talking about America and our political climate. I'm not political in any way. In fact, I hate politics.
Cool, man.
And I almost feel like an alien looking at this whole thing unfold too. I feel like I'm from outer space and I'm watching people just get at each other's throats on Facebook, get on Twitter. Everybody's fighting. I'm like, what are you guys doing? We don't even know what we are, what the universe is. Like we should be discussing that, where we all come from. That's the common thread of that, and that's far more interesting to me too than who did what, who said what, who, it's just BS. So I don't get involved with that. But I will say, you could say maybe conservative type thinking people would be more number five, and then you're talking about some of these way more progressive people that are green, take care of each other, help the homeless, like the very compassionate, very postmodern type thinking. Now, I was watching something where the guy was talking about too how, where that's great for the community and it's great for society, it also has a lot of blind spots as well. So like I said, none of these are better or worse. It's just the next level. I wanted to ask you something though before we move on from there. Do you think that it's possible to skip levels?
I don't think so. I think Graves said that you had to live through each stage to sort of drive you through to the next one. But he did say that these higher stages, you would move through them much quicker in your life, or you could move them through them much quicker in your life, depending on your life conditions. And one thing I've found with the model is once I was aware of the model, I was able to drive sort of my own life conditions and try and push myself through the stages as such. You know what I mean? And it's funny. You can't really force these things because it has to be something natural. It has to be a natural worldview for you. But just by embracing the sort of next stage up's worldview a little bit and just being open minded to it and try and see the world through their perspective can help you sort of move through the stages. And yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of conversation about it helped drive me as well because it sort of creates conflict. You know what I mean? You start having conflict with people on different worldviews, and then you start realizing why you're having these conflicts, and so that can help push you through to the next level as well. Which is basically changing your life conditions to sort of help push you in that direction. I was definitely materialistic. Only before I found out Graves's theory, I was certainly chasing success in everything in life. But once I found his theory, I started looking into the green way because I used to always think, oh, they're just leftist hippies or whatever, you know what I mean? And wasn't into that sort of stuff. And once I looked at this model, I thought, well, maybe I should expand my mind and think about this sort of stuff. And once I started embracing it, I sort of understood it more, and you start, like I said, I started studying all sorts of things, and push me up through these layers, and I think that's sort of what people can do to not skip a layer, but just help progress you through layers. Yeah, you can definitely have, you might be predominantly one layer and then not really much of the layer above, but then some of the layer above that. You can definitely have that. And a lot of the time, say the 5 will relate to the 7 and the 6 will relate to the 4 and the 8. and that's just because they're on the same side of thinking. They're on the left and right side of thinking. So you definitely, like a 3 will look at a 5 and go, yeah, I'm definitely a 5. I can see that in me, but they might not be. That they might just think they are, because they have a lot of the same traits. They're the individual side traits or the communal side traits. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think when I think about it though, if I'm being honest, I'm left-handed and I don't know how that plays into the left right side, and I'm very creative. Um I've never really felt like a right brain person though. Like even though I'm very compassionate towards animals and I don't like hunt or and not that I'm against it either. You do what you do, I don't care. It's not
Yeah.
bothering me. But my personal I swerve out of the way for chipmunks. So like for me it's like I'm like that, but I almost feel that way more than so um I'm less compassionate if I'm being honest towards like other people. Not that I love everybody. I want everybody to have a phenomenal life, but I don't feel like I need to go out of my way to do this social justice stuff or whatever. Like it's just not I don't feel like I feel like I'm not beyond that, but I feel like I said, I'm thinking like what are we? What is the universe? I'm thinking in very um holistic way. Like I think a lot of the stuff that people fight about, I look at it as petty, and maybe that's just I don't know where I stand, like um where that stands is a positive thing or a negative thing. But like I said, when I hear people talk about politics, it's just like, oh my god, you're still doing that. You're feeding into the system and you don't even realize that you're doing it, but you're like it's this balancing act and nothing really gets done. Like if you look at like US laws, like yeah, if you money might go here, money might go there, but in reality your day-to-day life does not really change dramatically. There's really nothing that happens on a day-to-day basis where you need to be so involved with it, where you're fighting with coworkers and family members and that kind of stuff. So
Boyfriends.
boy, boyfriends. So yeah, but so what I'm trying to get at is, like I said, I feel like maybe number 6 for me is been like when I'm just like I said, I'm a compassionate person in general. However, I don't go out of my way to I'll help people if I see somebody that needs help, like something like that. But I'm not going to go out of my way to do something I guess if I don't know if that makes sense, but so I don't know how that plays for number 6. If is number 6, about the self, it says sacrifice self communal. I've never really felt that way. Like I said, I don't know. That's the weird
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. I'll read you out just some of the stuff that I've got down here for green, and these are just some of the, I suppose, common traits of someone on that level. And you mentioned some of them already. So you've probably got bits of it in it. You don't. It's not doesn't have to be specific things, but I'll just read them out to you. We've got acceptance, appreciation, awareness, balance, compassion, contribution, cooperation, consensus, diversity, empathy, encouragement, fairness, generosity, happiness, harmony, mindfulness, openness, respect, selflessness, sharing, spirituality, and supportive. So, I'm sure
So
if you thought about yourself, you would have a lot of those traits in you.
so what you just said though, so I can point out what I'm not. So I guess I lack some sort of a little bit of empathy. I feel like I'm less empathetic towards people. Like we're all in this together. Why does this person need my help more than the next person? We're all kind of it's all relative to me. That's the way I think about
Sure,
things. So
sure,
if somebody falls on the ground or is going to get hit by, like obviously I'll do whatever I can. But in terms of what you just mentioned and rattled off, I'd say I'm less empathetic. However, my strengths, I believe, are mindfulness and respect. So
sure.
I get what. So it's not, even though there's these basic colors and levels and stuff. It's really complex as well because we are complex creatures and there are so many different facets.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And that's what what the theory was saying, that these traits emerge from this way of thinking or from these worldviews. And I suppose what Graves sort of stated was that if your dominant behaviour and your dominant thoughts come from those particular traits, then that's probably what layer that you are as an individual. And so it is complex to work out because you can be different layers in different ways. and in different life conditions. But I don't know. For myself, I just look at what I do dominantly. What are my dominant behaviours at work and at home and in social environments and things like that, and what do I truly believe, and that's how I sort of work out what layer that I would identify with the most. And yeah, I don't really know, Mike. I haven't. I don't. I look through my life and I don't think I've skipped any of the layers. All I can say is that maybe, maybe maybe you sort of haven't fully got to those higher layers if you haven't gone through those other things. I'm not too sure, but yeah, as far as I can tell, we have to go through these layers to get to the understanding everything about them to get to these higher stages in our evolution.
No, absolutely. I know. Well, Maurice and I are early on. We were musicians and we were in bands and that kind of culture too. So when you look at, like you
Yeah,
said, like hippy dippy, like that whole, we've been around that since we were in high school. So I think maybe
yeah,
that was always imprinted on me, and I just, it's not something that I point out that I do, but it's just part of who we are as people. But when you look at these, like you said, the higher levels, so let's get to 7 and 8. So um I definitely think, first of all, I have OCD. It's very mild now, but when I was um younger, before I had a couple visionary experiences with plant medicine and stuff, I it was very bad. It was like just scared of germs, flus. Somebody sneezed next to me, I'd be like, "Oh, I don't want to get," like wash my hands a million times, like that kind of stuff. Um, when I think though, I'm stuck in that from OCD though, the systematic thinking. Like I think in like patterns and systems. So if I see, I always make correlations, and like I can play out what's going to happen sometimes before it even happens. So whether I'm watching a movie with my wife and I'm like, this is going to happen, and it's, it could be kind of a twisty turvy movie. I know Maurice and I were watching Black Mirror. I don't know if you've seen Black Mirror on Netflix, but he kept putting on different episodes, and I would guess pretty much the ending from the beginning. So just by seeing certain things and that's one of my benefits that I use OCD for, is picking out these, um, you know, systems or these different connecting points, and then using them to my advantage to play something out in my head, so I know ahead of time, is this worth it, is it not worth it, kind of a thing.
yeah, cool. Yeah, well, that does sound a lot like layer seven. There, it is very much systematic thinking. One thing um, Graves picked up in his model was that it was a massive change. It was a huge shift in consciousness to layer seven, and he sort of equated it basically to something like jumping from an animal to a human. It was this radical change in the people that he observed it in, and so that they had a way of thinking that was different to what it was to all his other students, and it was very much what he sort of said. It was left and right thinking. He said it was the first time we sort of started using both. Hey, sorry guys, can you hop
No
out?
worries, no worries.
Callum, I'm just on the phone at the moment. Sorry, my kids are here.
No
Uh,
worries.
that's all good, man. Yeah, and so he did. He said they were radically different type of people, and
So it's like
and sort of,
logical, the logical part of your brain marrying the creative side of your brain, kind of a thing.
yeah, it's what's termed as trans-rational. So the first three layers were what we call pre-rational. You didn't really live rationally. Then the 4, 5, and 6 was the rational mind, as we know today, and then past that was trans-rational thinking. So it was very much spiritual. It was very much sort of understanding the effects of psychoactive plants, or not really understanding them, but at least acknowledging them, I suppose we could say, and acknowledging the entire universe and the connectedness of it. I think I don't know if you know of a man called Nassim Haramein. You probably do, but he's done a lot of good work.
Yeah, I think
In
I
the
follow him on Twitter. He does quantum physics mixed with spirituality type stuff.
Yeah, he's got brilliant work. He's basically done the maths on how everything's connected in the universe. So it's pretty impressive, you know what I mean? He's worked out the radius of a proton in Planck length, and yeah, was basically able to work out the whole structure of the universe is connected through this theory that he's creating. It's
Sure.
quite interesting stuff. So, and again, that's that very high layer consciousness. That's that 7 or 8, or it could be even higher. Graves said that he only observed 8 layers, but there was obviously going to be more, and he observed these layers in the 60s and 70s. So there's definitely higher layers today around the planet, And I think Harameen and some of these other people like him are definitely examples of those type of people.
Do you have to have a high IQ to achieve that, or?
I don't think so necessarily. Graves didn't say that there was a higher IQ in any of the different stages. I did think he said 7 and 8 was slightly higher, but it was minuscule. It wasn't very much at all. And I think the slight increase in those higher layers is just basically from experience. They've experienced a lot of different life conditions to get up there, so that naturally will increase your intelligence a little bit there. But definitely not if you do an IQ test. A layer 4 and a layer 7 could have very similar IQs. It was essentially just life conditions driving them into thinking differently, into viewing the world differently.
Do you think psychedelics have a bearing on how you may navigate these transitional boundaries or these barriers? You said like these different changes. Could they help facilitate the move? So like if let's say I'm stuck on 5 and I just want to become more compassionate person, maybe I have a psychedelic experience and see, oh, okay, this is what this is, or at least try and get there. Do you think that that's a way to do that? Not that we obviously advocate anybody has to do anything, but just that these plant medicines might be used to show people, sometimes when you get outside of your own consciousness and you start to look at things, you start to see things that you can't see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's obvious that humans used psychoactive plants in our ancient histories, and I think that is the main driver of this evolutionary change. If just imagine you're in that chaotic period in the change process, and you're stuck there, and you're not able to work out how to get out of it. Well, psychoactive plants would be definitely a good way of altering your mind state to help enable you to think differently and maybe solve some of your problems that you've got. So yeah, certainly psychoactive plants have played a big part in this.
So I know when you look at like 1 through 6 has blind spots. They talk about how why it's necessary to move from one to the other. Now, do you think does 7 and 8 have blind spots, or you're just past the point of not being able to see? So like let's say I meditate and I use plant medicine and I'm very mindful and respectful and just understand what's going on while trying to achieve some sort of enlightenment or something along like a knowledge quest, something along those lines. Do you think that you still have those blind spots, or do you think it's something that comes as like a flash? So if like I have a bad day or somebody pisses me off or something like that, you might revert back to one of the lower levels or something along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly how it is. You get to those higher levels. Basically, when you are on those higher levels, you become aware of all these levels, and even without knowledge of the theory, you just become more aware that everyone has different worldviews, basically, and that is the reason why they act and say the things they do. So those higher levels are more that they're able to realize that, I suppose, and adjust their behaviours accordingly. So if they are in an environment where they're required to act as a 5 or a 4 or a 6, that they will just adjust their behaviour to suit the environment. And that and it makes sense because you need to do that to be able to communicate with people, you know what I mean, and relate to them on their level. A lot of the people at 7, you look at a lot of the stuff Jim Carrey's put out there lately. He's definitely up on these higher layers, and most people just can't relate to what he's talking about. You know what I mean? And it's because he's communicating with this higher layer of consciousness. You know what I mean? And unless you're up there on that layer with him, it's really hard to comprehend what he's even talking about. And most of the people that the media and stuff that are sort of interviewing him are just saying he's crazy and he's gone back to pre-rational thinking. But Jim Carrey's definitely not pre-rational. He's gone trans-rational, and he's just struggling to communicate that back to the rational people. You know what I mean?
He's
and
gone
so
pre-pet, pre-pet detective over there. That's what he's doing.
I mean, I love Jim Carrey, man. You know, he's a great dude in that, and
I do too.
you just think you just got to sometimes just talk to people on their level. You know what I mean? Otherwise, they're not going to understand anything you're talking about. So
yeah,
as
it's hard for him because everybody's, you know, he's got to talk to the media and stuff, and that's the source of all the. I don't want to call them morons, but
No, don't you think
know.
media though? Media seems like it's stuck on like it's 5 and it's not going
Definitely.
anywhere. It's just 5. It's always going to
Yeah.
be 5. It actually might even be 4 too, 4 and 5.
Yeah,
Very,
it kind of
ve-
seems to me. It seems like an agenda, you know, from the powers that be, you know, the governments or the corporations and stuff. They want to push this stuff, don't they? So they're really the people that sponsor our media stations and
well,
provide them with their content, you know. So
think about what
it's
we're
sort of
talking about though. Think about what we're talking about right now. Something that's so simplistic. So this is just a way to communicate. Like if you look at this chart and you somewhat understand it, you
yeah,
can't, it seems like you wouldn't be able to get in a fight anymore if you truly did understand it and um you know where it's kind of going, so like I like the chart because it shows you, okay, this is what's happened so far, but I believe that there's gonna be more than 7 or 8, whether it takes 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, whatever. There's gonna be 10, 15, 20, so um I think that we need people to start thinking along 7 and 8 so we can push to that 9, whatever that 9 is, and then keep flip flopping. And maybe at some point, get to the Aristotle mode where it's left brain, less right brain, and more in the middle. Just understanding. Like I think that's where I'm at as a person. I think the world's a very gray, and I don't think you can villainize or get mad at people like you're saying because they have a certain worldview based on their personal experiences in life. Like you have no idea. I think everybody's relative. So where somebody that's a hunter gatherer in the Amazon forest, they might be just as happy as me, even though we have two completely different worldviews, different lifestyles, whatever. They're probably even happier than me, doing
definitely.
killing their own prey and doing ayahuasca ceremonies and all sorts of crazy shit, so.
Yeah, I got this little thing I like to say, and it's like, it's relevant to me because I go through it with my job a little bit in my day-to-day life, and it's what happens is I call it the 5-4-3. So, and it can happen in any environment, in a social environment where you'll start off having a conversation with someone and just say you're both acting on layer 5, where you're trying to change the other person's perspective to see your perspective and make, you're basically trying to convince them that you're right and they're wrong. And as we know, that's not the case, but that's what you'll do. So you'll both be on 5, and that's an individual thing. You'll be both trying to project your own view onto each other, and you'll argue about it. And if you can't come to an agreement, it drops to 4, right? And 4's from your perspective, there's only one way, and it's your way that you were trying to convince the other person of. And so you'll go, right, mate, your way is just wrong. It's this way or no way. And this especially happens in bars with people that are drunk, I suppose. And they'll say it's my way or the highway. And sometimes you say 4 is a communal layer. So you might go, hey, this guy thinks this. What a fool. He's not seeing it my way. Tell him he's got to see it my way. And so you can see that communal aspect come into it. And if that both breaks down, they both go to 4 and they both won't concede, then you'll go to 3, which is the power base, right? And the next guy will go, right, mate, I'm going to show you it's my way. And they'll, come to blows. So I call it the 5-4-3. So when I'm in these environments and I see someone approach me and we start having these sort of conversations, I can analyze it and go, right, we're both at 5 here. We're going to go to 4, and then if we get to 4, the next day is 3. You know what I mean? And someone said to me, "What's 2 and 1?" And I said, "Well, 2 is probably when all of our friends jump in, and when 1's probably, the whole pub's joined in." I don't know,
Magnum, man.
keep going down. Yeah, you know what I mean. So I like to look at the world now, and when I have conversations with people, and it's a bit funny, but I can kind of put a number above their head. Like in a video game, you just put a number above their head as to what their worldview is, and then when they speak, you can put numbers to the language that comes out of their mouth, and sometimes that's different to the number that's above their head. You know what I mean? Because people can, they can speak differently to how they actually think. So you can sort of work that out. And you see that a lot in your boss. Your boss might be layer 5. He wants to manipulate all these workers to do what they want, but he wants you to be 4. So he talks to you like there's only one way. It's an authoritarian way, and he needs you to be 4. and submit to his way. Otherwise, he can't be a good boss at 5. So if all of his workers come up to 5, he really has to go to 6. And that's the problem in a lot of workplaces today. We notice that our bosses are 5. They want to manipulate, break the rules wherever it suits them. It's okay to do that for them, but for us, it's not. And we have to be, subordinate to the superior authority, I suppose. And it's not just in a workplace; it's in our societies. Our governments want to do the same. They want to, do whatever they want and take bribes and money from political donors, and they want to be able to, invade other countries, and they want to do whatever they want. And but they don't want us to be able to do whatever we want. We've got to follow their rules, and if we don't, there's strict consequences. So you can kind of see everyone's 5. We all break the rules, and so there's a lot of tension with governments. People aren't really happy with their governments in most places because they're 5 as well, and we need them to move up to 6 and to start to cater to our needs a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about that lately. Like, I'm just like I said, I'm sick of just watching the political fights, and it's just like this is stupid. And I do think I'm too good for it. If I'm being honest, I look at it, I'm like, I feel like an alien watching some sort of weird show where these people are playing tug of war, and then they're just going to keep pulling back and forth, over time, and nothing really is going to happen. That's how I feel.
No, it's primitive, right? It feels primitive.
Right. So for me, it's like I've been thinking, well, what would be a good solution? I think, voting on ideas would be a better idea instead of people, instead of placing some sort of power in people, you vote for ideas and maybe you have some people in charge of those ideas, but yeah, I think what comes down to it is we're just flawed beings too, we do have cognitive bias and, you can go into something with the best of intentions and get, corrupted in some way or manipulated or just like anything else in life. So I do think that there's that. So you know I think people at the same time, the US is the great experiment, like at the time it was the new thing, and I still think that there's a lot of good there, but it's the way that it's being used is missed, it's taken a couple missteps, I think. But I don't know, man. I wish people would think more on the line, like those questions I asked. I always humble myself like every day. I think, what am I? Like, why are we here? Like those are the questions that plague me. I could care less about, like I said, the daily stuff or what's on TV or pop culture or anything like that. I'm more concerned about these ideas and where we come from and where we're going and how are we going to get there, So when you brought up this idea though, I was in the mindset, like I was unaware of this. So I mean, we like all these topics and different things, but I was unaware of Dr. Graves and spiral dynamics and all that stuff. So
very interesting stuff.
It's super interesting. But for me, it was
glad
like,
you guys like it.
yeah, I was thinking like for the last couple of years. So I had like an enlightenment or an awakening like a couple of years ago where I started doing all this research. This is why we're doing this podcast. And I was trying to figure out like why do I think this way now? Like I said, sometimes I feel like an alien observing people, and it's to the point now where I couldn't bear it anymore. And then I saw this chart. I'm like, wow, this makes sense. And, just listening to different other people talk about it on YouTube and reading different, studies online and stuff like that. What I've come to realize, I wasn't, I used to look at people and be like, is this person just stupid or they're just, but now it's like, I understand they're just at a different level based on where they live, how they live, whatever their status is, different things like that. So, I'm glad you showed this to me, and I'm glad we're talking about this because it's almost like a synchronicity. Because for me, it was this like big step in understanding, because like we can talk about consciousness and all the woo woo stuff and the quantum physics and quantum mechanics and all that, and all that stuff's awesome. I love talking about all that, but this is a different way to look at it. This is something that's been observed and recorded in the academic world. But how is this accepted among like other academics and psychologists and anthropologists and that kind of stuff? Do you know?
Yeah, well, Graves was around at the same time as Maslow, and Maslow's needs of hierarchy was the most dominant or the most common accepted theory of humans' needs, but and how we how we prioritize things. But Graves sort of flipped his model up, and up on its head. Like his was a triangle, where Graves is a spiral. You know what I mean? So it's the opposite sort of process. And Maslow, in the end, I think we can find on Google there, Maslow conceded that Graves's theory was superior to his. So, you know, it was accepted, but because he didn't get it, because he didn't live long enough to have it peer reviewed and to have it published in academia, then it just hasn't gotten coverage, I suppose. It hasn't been taught in universities. It hasn't, people just haven't really learnt about it. And, you know, it was only a few years ago I got told about it, and it was through a man that lives in Byron Bay here, and he does a radio show and speaks about it once a week. And I just heard him on the radio talking about it, and you know, like yourself, when you start to hear this stuff about it or look into it, you go, wow, this makes sense. I'm interested in this. You know, I can see how I've gone through these processes, and I can see how other people are going through these processes. And so, essentially, I got right into it because of him. And there's books online that you can purchase. There is YouTube content, which you've probably looked at. So yeah, it's slowly growing. I think the more it spreads, hopefully academia can pick it up. When I first found out about it, I was, you know, in that renewal phase, I suppose. I was crazy about it and trying to tell everybody and just be like, look, we all need to learn this stuff. This will help you understand yourself and help you fix your problems in your life and help you, help other people as well. You know what I mean? Fix their problems, because you have better understanding in communications and things like that. So yeah, hopefully it does get picked up. You know what I mean? More and more. The spiral dynamics model was done by a dude called Beck was his last name.
Yeah, Don Beck and Chris Cohen.
Yeah, those guys. They sort of have their own take on it, but it's essentially they've just grabbed that Graves's research and made the model, like finished it off and published their work. People can do those courses. I'm not sure if it's not something that is taught at university. They're sort of stuff you have to do on your own, I suppose. There's another theory I'm not too sure if you've looked into. It's called integral, and that was from Ken Wilber, and it's very similar to the spiral dynamics model. Very similar. He used different colours, but it was basically the same sort of mapping, and he was he taught it in a very spiritual way, so it was a bit differently. Graves was more scientific, and Wilber was more spiritual, so it was based on just basically his feelings and the way that he's seen the world, not based on scientific data as such. But they both came up with the same sort of work, so it's quite interesting to look at Ken Wilber's work as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I think for me though, it's when you look at the chart, it's weird because it's like you do want to project yourself higher. However, I think that like I said, I think if you're on some sort of like a spiritual or an awakening or an enlightenment kind of kick, that means you're probably either meditating or using plant medicines or just doing tons of research or just being mindful in general and just understanding humans and patterns and different things. So I think that, you know, anybody could listen to this and think, oh yeah, I'm a 5 or I'm a 6 or I'm a 7 or whatever. And like I said, somebody will take this chart and then use it and be like, you're only a 5 and I'm a 6, you know, or so,
Yeah,
so it's like human nature. Like you could take
5, 4,
this,
3, baby.
yeah, they could, somebody, if they put this on the news tonight, somebody be like, oh, what are you saying? I'm less than you, or I'm not as smart as you, or, you know, so like, I think, like I said, I think that you have to be the right kind of person to even look at this and understand it too. Because if I showed this to somebody, let's say I took it to work tomorrow, and I work with really smart people, but you know, it's still a job and people are in the office doing stuff. So, hey, take a look at this. Oh yeah, that's cool. Oh, that's what that means. They're not going to implement it. They don't care. It's almost like you have to find this kind of stuff yourself. You know, like if you're on the kick, looking for this stuff, you're the type of person that's probably going to understand it.
Yeah, it comes from the inquisitive mind, doesn't it? You really have to be interested and thinking about why you think the way you think. You know what I mean? And because a lot of people just think that the way they think is just the way they think, and that they can't do anything about that. But and they don't understand it really. They just think, oh, well, that's just how we do it. But when you know, if you're more inquisitively minded, you will look into the reasons why you think. You know, you'll look into your environment and go, oh, that's why I like football, or that's why I like that, or you know what I mean, or I was raised in a house listening to certain type of music, and that's why I'm attracted to that music now later in life, and so you start to understand that your mind is shaped by your environment that you live in, I think. And so that's why when if you have this understanding of those concepts, you'll find this theory extremely interesting, you know what I mean? Because it can walk you through the different mind states that you've been in previous stages of your life. So, yeah, and I get what you're saying as well, that people don't like to have a number put on them. When I first had this theory, was doing that, and I don't recommend anyone to do that. Don't put a number on anybody. One, because we don't truly know everything about people. You know, they might just be perceived as a certain number in the environment that they're in when we're interacting with them. So it can be a personal thing for people in that regard. And if they're not open to the theory, then they'll just think you're very judgmental. So it's not good to put numbers on people.
Yeah, I mean,
what I try to do is just think about it.
you can excel, like I said, in my personal opinion, I think you can excel at every one of the levels. I think though, like anything else, you could be utilizing it in a bad way or negative way. So like, you know, if you're a number 5 and you're just caught up in society and pop culture and you only care about materialistic things, and you know, that could be a bad habit to get into, or think about things in a negative way, or maybe you're not respectful, or whatever that case may be. You go up to a number 6. Well, number 6 is supposed to be compassionate, and you know, so like number 6, you know, their blind spot would be the fact that they don't really completely understand that you need some of those other levels to stabilize society, you know? So like they think that their thinking is the only way to be, but in reality, if everybody thought like that, it would be the end of pretty much, you know, the human race. So, you know, there's different blind spots to different ones, and we all can't be, on the same wavelength, unfortunately. But I think that that's a good thing too. I think that it adds diversity to thinking. And I know, like I said earlier, I have moments where I'll get pissed off or something, and I'll revert back to one of the lower levels, and I'll be like, wow. But now that I understand all this kind of stuff, or I do mindfulness meditation and that kind of stuff, when I look at some of these things, I can look back and be like, this is how I was. I can take a look like from like a third person perspective, kind of, and be like, oh, I should have done this, or I could have approached it like this, and I think that's where the real learning comes in. Are these like little, once you get to the upper levels, like these little breaks that you have, if you can like learn from when you have them, and next time maybe avoid it by doing something different or trying to think in a different way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You just become aware of your behaviour a lot more, don't you? And you start to go, oh, that's why I'm doing that, and that's having a negative result in my life, and I need to change that. And maybe I could try doing it a different way. And so, if like for instance, if you were behaving like a 5 and you went, oh, well, maybe I should try acting more like a 6, and that might solve some of my problems. And so that's generally what I try to do if I see someone really struggling with say layer 5 problems, because that's quite common today. You'll notice around, you'll see a lot of people struggling with layer 5. They're unable to keep up really in the competitive environment that we're in. They just can't keep their head above water. And so I try to teach them that, like, some of the 6 values. I'll be like, look, does it really matter? Do you have to be the best? Do you need to have all this material wealth? Do you have to keep up with the Joneses and look like the Kardashians? You know what I mean? And maybe we should start to appreciate our environment, appreciate who you are just as an individual, as an individual within a community. You know what I mean? Not trying to change the community to suit you. You know what I mean? Just embrace everything. And so I try to teach people that. I try and get them to come connect back to nature a little bit. Like get away from your screens for a day. Go spend the day in nature and climb a mountain, walk through some bush. Whatever you like to do, go to the ocean. So it's definitely, when people are struggling with whatever layer they're on, if you can help them with the next layer up sort of behaviours, it generally solves some of their problems. You know what I mean? It generally takes away some of that stress and chaos that they're in by doing that. And it's just a way that the model works, I suppose. So in an individual level, if you feel like you're struggling on a particular layer, you just look up the layer above you and just go, right, I might try and do some stuff like that, and just see if that works for me. And so you really need an open mind to embrace this theory. A lot of people in those first 6 layers won't have an open enough mind to embrace it, and they'll just think, nah, everyone's got to be like me. But definitely, if you're more open-minded and embrace these higher layers of consciousness, then you will understand, you know, how you can help people with it. You know, you just use this model to help people and help yourself, you know.
Yeah, actually, I kind of learned that from doing this podcast of the whole thing. Like, I stopped trying to I used to get in all these fights with people on Reddit and Facebook, and not even fights, just debates. Like, I know more than you, kind of a thing, citing different stuff, just wanking off, you know? So, for me, it was like a year ago, and I just said, you know what? I'm too, I'm beyond this. I don't need to be doing this. I don't need to, is where you do learn things sometimes and get things out of it. It's just more, it gives me like a bad feeling, like it gives me like a negative feeling, almost like an anxious feeling, that a constant, because with our phones and everything constantly at our side and attached to us, hey, there's Facebook ding, oh, I know it's the guy rebuttaling what I just sent him, rebutting what he just said, so it's this
Yeah.
like never ending thing. And I equate it to like the whole political thing too. So I just, like a year ago, I was like, you know what, I'm done getting in these stupid little petty little arguments. So I try to just convert it to positivity. So somebody leaves a nice comment or a message or whatever, I totally will respond, oh, thank you. So, blah, blah, blah. If somebody's negative, I just don't usually respond, so it's just not worth getting into the whole thing. So,
Yeah, I went through the same process. I used to argue and fight a lot, especially when I first got into Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and things. That's very contentious with some people. They're either for it or against it. It's either a scam or it's the revolution, you know what I mean? So I was constantly arguing with people on that, and it actually led to me deleting my social media accounts. I don't have Facebook and anything like that anymore. I just got rid of them because it was just too hard, you know.
smart.
And yeah, to be honest, ever since I have deleted them, I've had much better peace of mind. I don't stress about other people's opinions of me anymore. I don't have to be constantly checking up on the latest news of the day or the latest things going on in my feed anymore. So I find it a lot more relaxing, and it feels natural to me. I mean, I think about the history of humans and go, these things are only, what, 100 years we've been looking at screens, if that. We had radio, not even 100 years, 50, 60 years or something,
Yeah.
We had radios and stuff. And when you think back at the history of humans, we weren't looking at screens, unable to communicate with our partners next to us. You know what I mean? We were basically sitting around in large communal groups or in little tribes or little civilizations talking about things. And that's where some of the great philosophers come from, Aristotle and Plato and those guys. They lived in that world where, well, what would you do? You would sit around and talk about stuff, and by doing that, they were able to work a lot of stuff out. That's where a lot of our great knowledge comes from, those great philosophers back in those times. So I like to get back to it. I think people need to get back to it. We've got to stop thinking about just trying to make money and trying to, like, who's got the fanciest car or house or who looks pretty or that's just, to me, that's nonsensical. We just move past that and we start worrying about other things. How can we have a sustainable environment to live in? How can we all have everything that we need rather than just the one percenters having basically everything, and everyone else fighting for the scraps. So it's definitely more of a worldview that's coming. We see a lot of our younger generation are pushing this way. It's definitely a case of our communications getting quicker. Like, you probably think back to when you were a child and your communications back then were pretty limited. You might have had one phone in your home and maybe one television and things like this if you're lucky, and so kids today all have their own screens, and so you might have watched a couple of cartoons when you're a child per day, but they can watch 50 cartoons a day. You know what I mean? So they're learning much more faster than we were. They're getting a lot more content fed into their minds, and as a result, they're evolving quicker. It's like you said at the start, time's getting quicker, and I think that's basically why we're communicating so much quicker, that someone can learn something and then, within hours, the whole world could learn that off them because it's on the internet, right? Whereas in the past, it could take decades or centuries for that information to travel around the world. So our younger people are driving this. You can see a lot of them pushing into green, that green, that protests going on. They want to, in your country, it's there's a lot of anti-guns and anti, whatever movements going on. In my country, it's anti, what have we got, anti-plastics and anti-pollutions and anti-this. So that all the young people are protesting. We've got a lot of people going vegan, because they're or vegetarian. They don't like the fact that we're killing animals anymore and things like this. So there's all different ways people are thinking into the future now. And I'm not saying they're all right. I'm just saying it's just an obvious observation of that layer 6 behaviour coming into it. You know, like humans are actually starting to have empathy for animals, and we've always have. But now the animals that we're eating every day, and I think it's because we see there's all footage now of like animals getting slaughtered and the treatment that they're going through, like chickens in cages and all these sort of things. So people become more aware of this through our communications devices, and it changes the way we think about the world.
You know
And
what's
so the more
weird?
and more of this, yep,
I can watch a hunting show and just be completely fine, or watch an animal kill another animal or anything like that. For me, you're right. It's like seeing when they show those messed up commercials where they're playing to your emotions with the what do they call them, factory farms or different things, and there's a million chickens in one little coop and they're all on top of each other, or the cows directly next to each other in these little cubicles, different. It's like that imagery. Yeah, I mean, I think that um that's one of the weirder things too about, like, yeah, I think cooking meat obviously played into our evolving as people, from, our early ancestors to Homo sapiens and the doubling and tripling of our brain size. But
yeah,
when you look at it now, it's like now we want to get beyond that. We want to evolve past that. And um, I could see that point of view, but I do think that we wouldn't think that way if like, for instance, these people that are like bitching and complaining, if they had to go out there and like hunt or kill their own dinner, they would have a completely different respect for um, nature, animal, and even eating itself. Like that's why there's so many people, and I'm guilty of it myself. For years I would just eat whatever's easiest takeout, quick, drive through fast food or whatever in my younger years, So when you don't think about it, it's like, oh, it's just this thing that you do, But if you have to go out there and kill a chicken or kill whatever, you become attached to this thing in a different way, and you have to think about it, and there's emotions involved with it, And I also think there's something to killing an animal that's, stressed out or in fear, probably releases all sorts of
Grief.
hormones and yeah, different gross
yeah.
stuff, as opposed to killing, like, if I shot an elk with a gun or a bow and arrow, it's probably not going to suffer and it's just going to die. And then there's no, it's just a more natural way for it to die. It's less cringeworthy to look at.
Yeah, I think that's basically it. I think most of the people, there is the extremists that are against all meat eating. I eat meat, by the way, but there's extremists that are against it. But I think the heart of it is they just are against the treatment of the animals. So that, when they see them in that terrible conditions, that's what triggers them. You know what I mean?
They should point that out though. Because like if they specified that, if like, okay, so let's say if these groups came out and they were protesting like, we just want to do rid of these abusive farms and I think most people would be for that. So I think if
Yeah,
they directed it more specifically as opposed to just the treatment of all animals, like there's these crazy people like, I don't know if you watch Joe Rogan's podcast, but he'll play these clips and these people will flip out over like dumb stuff of like an animal killing another animal, or like, a hunter killing, this or that. I don't necessarily think killing a lion or anything like that's necessary, but when it comes to shooting stuff for food, whether it's a
An
deer,
elephant?
antelope, whatever, that's a different story. But yeah, if you're killing like game just to kill, I don't really see a benefit in that.
Oh, it's a sport, man. It's fucking.
Yeah. Even when I go fishing, unless it's a beast, then I'm going to cook this thing up. There's really no, you throw that thing back in the water. So,
yeah. Well, humans have been hunting forever, haven't we? We've been hunting and killing our game to survive for forever, as long as we can remember. So I think the people that are sort of anti that, they forget that, they don't realize that this is a natural behavior. Indigenous people on all lands do it. And so that's why I say I think it can be a bit of a fad too, or a bit of a trend, can't it? That people can jump on the bandwagon and go, yeah, I'm just going to jump in with this crew and support it without fully understanding what they're supporting, right? And they just grasp hold of one little part of the idea and run with it. Whereas I think the true meaning, if they really look into it and understand what they're fighting for, it really is just treatment, of the animals. And most people, like you said, we would respect that. Everyone agrees with that. No one thinks anyone or anything should be suffering. You know what I mean? And it's certainly layer 6. Layer 5, they don't see it as suffering. They think that humans we have consciousness, and animals are just there for us to do whatever we want, to provide us with food, to entertain us, to do whatever, to be our servants, even in some cases. So.
I don't know, man. I mean, my cat, I have some telepathy things going on there with my cats. Like I'll look at my cat and I'll just, if I don't want her to jump up on something, I'll just give her a stare. I'm like, don't jump up on that, and then she won't. She probably doesn't understand me, but just that the look,
Oh man, I believe they've all got consciousness. Even a rock's probably got some form of consciousness.
Well, that's a whole nother level. That's some Rupert Sheldrake stuff. That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah. I know. We can't go too deep. Yeah. Sheldrake's a very intelligent man.
Oh, yeah. But I'm saying that's a whole nother conversation. We've talked about that on the podcast before, and I do like his work. I'd actually like to get him on this podcast at some point. But in terms of animal consciousness, 100% they're conscious. And as you just point out, Sheldrake's work, he did an interesting thing with dogs and cats, with them having telepathy and having an inkling that their owner was going to be home. So like even if it wasn't like most people get home the same time of day, if you work some sort of stable job time wise where it's not, if it's just 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever the case may be, maybe your animal would know. It'll be built into, hey, they're going to be home at this time, I'm going to go wait by the door. But the experiment that I think that he did was there was different times, but the animal still knew somehow. So it was just weird thing. So yeah, I mean, I believe that, humans, I mean, if we've evolved to communicate by talking and stuff, I think at some point that's going to become obsolete. If you look at the way evolution moves, we might be just conveying thoughts in the future, like in the advanced future, if we survive, with telepathy and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. You guys are familiar with Terence McKenna, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he talks about his experiences and speaking with the beings and stuff like that. And he's got one famous one that I love the way he explains it. Is just that they're singing beautiful images towards him, and those beautiful images are transforming and singing more beautiful images. And so there's this proliferation of just beautiful images coming towards him in this experiment, in this experience, and he can actually sing back to them do the same thing. And I sort of did a lot of thinking about that experience, because as we know, these DMT experiences are like lessons. They're like life lessons that are made to teach you something. And I was like, well, what were they trying to teach Terence? Because he had that experience a lot. He said it was a very common thing that he had that experience. And I was like, well, it must be teaching him something. And so what it was in relation to Graves's theory, I was like, if we can understand each other, right? So if he could understand them and they could understand him, then you can just sing beautiful things to each other or communicate beautiful things to each other. So the way I word it is, if we understand each other's layer of consciousness in Graves's theory, we can just speak positivity to each other, and that positivity forms and then generates more positivity, like a feedback loop type thing. And that's sort of what those things might have been trying to teach him, was that, like, if you can speak to people or sing to people positive notes, then that will proliferate and turn into more positivity. And that, I kind of like to think that Graves's theory can help people achieve that. If we can understand each other, we can talk to each other without conflict, and then we can do, well, who knows what we could achieve if we weren't conflicting all the time, as a species.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of people that believe the DMT entities are actually manifestations or hallucinations of our archetypes that are built into our consciousness. So, I don't necessarily believe that. I think that they could be separate. I'm torn on it. I believe that it's a possibility, but I also believe that there could be just this. We have this pareidolia built into our vision in the way we look at the world, and maybe the DMT strips us of that, and then it's like the unveil. The ancient times they talk about unveiling, that kind of a thing where you literally can see everything at that point. But what you were saying about this, what I was talking about with the archetype. So I think that when we're talking about this kind of stuff, it could make sense that maybe you're seeing the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, and they're telling you, or they're showing you, and maybe that there's even more steps beyond that we can achieve through either plant medicine, meditation, or just becoming more familiar with these kinds of things, so more people are on the same page, and then more research, more progress can be done on these topics.
Yeah, definitely. Graves also found a little bit of relation to chemistry in there. He didn't map it out, but he speculated that each layer had its own type of chemistry, like brain chemistry and body chemistry. And one thing that's really interesting, it's in one of the books of Graves, was that he found layer 7 and layer 8. He actually done experiments on them and found that layer 7s had high skin electrical resistance. So I'm not really versed up on what that means as such. I did a
Yeah, I
little
don't
bit
know
of
what
looking
that means.
into it,
Like
but it was just an anomaly that he come up with in his research, that these higher layered people had high skin electrical resistance, and he attributed it basically to what he thought would be brain chemistry and body chemistry changing as our consciousness expanded. And one of the things he spoke about with that is if we could work out what chemical reactions were happening, then in the future, then you could essentially make up a medicine to put someone onto a certain layer of consciousness. And while we have to, that wouldn't, you'd have to look at the ethics of that. That's not really that ethical, but it was just something that he noticed, and it was quite interesting. I found that if science could actually work out what chemistry was going on there, it would sort of help validate his theory a bit. And yeah, maybe people could experiment with jumping to different layers of consciousness through medicines. So yeah, another thing to look into, I suppose.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm always looking up stuff, researching stuff, and Maurice too.
Yo.
Maurice
cool,
is
man.
probably
That's good.
Maurice is getting the most out of this shit. I can tell you that much. This kid is getting a crash course in everything.
Yeah, no, I learned a lot today. That's for sure. Makes a lot of sense, though. I mean, I've kind of pictured myself as I'm drifting up the layers.
What are you, a
through this
2, a
podcast.
3? What are you?
I'm still dragging knuckles over here. I don't know.
It's extremely interesting. It literally changed my life when I found out about it, because I was able to look at the world differently. You know what I mean? And at first, like most people, you sort of go, oh, I don't know, it's just a theory. No one knows about it. I'm not too sure. Am I going crazy with all this stuff? But the more and more you look into it, the more research you do, the more you sort of start to understand it. And yeah, like I now see myself, I think most people operate within a few different layers. You have one main one, but you'll definitely operate on different ones. You know what I mean? And it's just the nature of life. Depends what happens. I like to think that if you knew the theory well enough, you could choose what layer you wanted to go to. So like, I'm living at whatever layer I am now. I want to go live at layer 2, and so I'll move myself to an environment where I can live in a tribal way. And I might live like that for X amount of years, and my life conditions drive me to want to get out of there. You know what I mean? And maybe the tribe won't let me out of there, so I'll have to go into that layer 3, that power mode, where I'll take out the tribal leader and say, I'm out of here, man. And I'll get on an aeroplane, and I'll go to another country, and I'll get there, and I'll need to follow that other country's rules, right? So I'll have to very quickly shift into 4, or that other country won't let me be there anymore. So you very quickly start following their rules and act like a layer 4 would again, and until you're stable in that country and able to stay there maybe, or whatever, or you've gone back to where you come from, and then you can start to manipulate again and go to layer 5. And so you can see how maybe in the future humans might live through these layers as much as they want. You know what I mean? And you might just quickly get yourself up to high and then go, I want to go back to 2. And so you'll just move and go live somewhere and go through the process again, just for fun.
Yeah, you show up in the jungle. You're like, hey, I'm Mike. I'm an 8. What's going on?
Yeah, man. I tend to think it's a bit unrealistic. Once you get to those higher layers, you're probably not going to want to go back and live in the jungle. You're enjoying the complexity of your life at that point.
You just sit in a room with your eyes closed and floating around.
The thing is, though, is I think that, like I was saying earlier, I think it's as easy as somebody pissing you off or saying the wrong thing, unless you're so in tuned or focused on that level, like you have to be pretty unshakable to not fall susceptible to falling back a little bit here and there, depending on the situation. I just think that it might be equivalent to like like stress, or like fight or flight kind of a thing, where it's a reactionary thing from our evolution that you just fall back into. I don't necessarily even think it's a negative thing if you're aware of it, you know, because it's just something that's built into you. So
yeah, certainly, it's just natural human behavior, and it's just having an awareness and understanding of that behavior, and not just you know, observing behavior and just judging it on whatever way you used to. You might have said it was really bad behavior or really good behavior. It doesn't matter, but it's just being aware of what type of behavior it is and what layer of consciousness it's coming from. And if you have that awareness, you, like you said, you'll understand yourself and you'll understand other people a lot better.
well, this has been super enlightening and fun. We're gonna definitely have you back on. We'll do a little follow-up sometime in the future, and once we've digested this more and looked a little bit more into this, we'll have you back on and get even more, you know, get deeper into it and see if there's anything, you know, maybe come up with some ideas where people can utilize to start implementing these and sharing these ideas with other people too, so it
I think
spreads.
just being aware of it's the first step, you know, altogether. So
Well, it's being
Yeah,
aware of
definitely.
it, and like I said, I think it's being aware of it, but it's also going. We can tell anybody. Like I said, I think you got to be creative, because I think stumbling upon something yourself is far more um, compels you. It's more compelling, I think, to the observer if it's something they found. You know,
right,
so like
that's
you
being
sent me
jammed
this
down your
thing.
throat or something.
Yeah, we were talking randomly. You saw one of our episodes. You sent me a message. This was kind of random, you know. So like the fact that we stumbled upon this and you showed us this chart and this guy's work and everything that I was unfamiliar, you know, with. That I think that now I can digest it, and it makes a lot of sense. And um, I think though, you know, like I said, I think it's got to be one of those things where you have to kind of be interested in these kind of topics, or in bettering yourself, or gaining knowledge, or trying to understand how the human mind works and things along that nature. Because I don't think that your average person that's stuck in a day-to-day grind is really cares about any of this stuff. They might. I'm not judging anybody, but it just seems like most people are content with, like you said, being at the 5 or being at the 6 and just going, you know, through the motions, and this is just how it is, and that's it, you know.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm glad you did your own research on it, you know what I mean? I just really mentioned a name to you and sent you a couple of graphs and said, have a look if you want. Because I've found before, if I try to tell everyone about it myself, they just go, oh, what would this guy know? You know, so it's good to actually go and look at Dr. Graves' work himself and realize it for yourself, you know.
I mean, what do any of us really know? You know?
Yeah.
Oh, it's that Dunning-Kruger. You only know what you know, right?
Yeah. Well, you can
And even
apply.
when you know,
You
even when you
apply
know
it to
something,
this
you
for
don't
sure.
know
I
it
mean,
all.
even like what we were talking about, thinking you're at one of the numbers and not really being there because you're just not. Oh, you're not, you know, outside yourself, and that can go for, like I said, humbling yourself with the question, what are we, who are we? The fact we will probably never know whether it's by design or not, just for the sheer fact that we, you know, philosophically we probably can't possibly know, because we're in it, you know, whether it's a simulation or some biological simulation or creation or whatever it is. We could be art to some being, you know, so we won't know, and we may never know, because we are in it, you know. We have the limit of, you know, being confined to this thing. So but that's what I for me, it's my job, I feel like, to investigate these things and look, and whether it's fringe or mainstream, if it's a good point, it's a good point. If it's interesting, it's interesting, you know. I don't think that I think we have to look at things objectively, and if it works, it works. If not, let's move on, you know.
Yeah, cool, man. I'm the same. Definitely the same, you know. Always intrigued to learn new things. I never really, if someone tells me something, I'll have to look into it myself without just believing someone, you know. That way of living is definitely beneficial, you know, because well, people believe in dogmas, don't they, if they don't look into things themselves or understand things themselves. And so yeah, it's Graves's theory will help everyone with that, you know. It truly is a model to help you understand yourself, and once you can do that, you can understand everyone.
Awesome, Ben. Well, thanks for coming on, and like I said, we'll get you back on in the future, and you have a
Cheers,
nice
brother.
night.
Cool, man. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Have a good
Peace.
one.
Cheers, boys.